We've been talking about doing something against the Mexican drug cartels regarding foreign terrorist organization designation for a decade, since 2012. Senator Kennedy and I are going to join forces. We believe Democrats will be involved to label these organizations as foreign terrorist organizations under U.S. law.
And that was South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham stepping up the fight big time against the Mexican cartels, saying, let's take the fight to them. His legislation would also include going after other countries, helping the Mexican drug cartels to face prosecution. Well, let's bring in former Homeland Security Department advisor. There he is, Charles Marino. Charles, you're also in South Carolina, so I think it's so important because in particular, we know that those Americans, as we know, that crossed over into Matamoros, Mexico, right over from Brownsville, they were South Carolina residents. It's horrifying to think what happened to them. Is it time to really get tough on the cartels and go take the fight to them, maybe using the U.S. military? What are your thoughts?
Well, it absolutely is. I mean, let's look at how quickly the Gulf Cartel tried to backtrack from what had occurred just based on the public pressure, the pressure from the press. So imagine if the United States actually put together a coordinated whole of government approach. You know, for the past 2 decades, Rita, we have been handling the cartels as the United States as simply a law enforcement problem. They are designated as transnational criminal organizations. I do not think that the terrorist designation hurts us in any way, because it allows us to bring additional tools to the table, like our military. And let's face it, the cartels are staffed with former Mexican military officers. So it makes sense that this is a quasi-criminal justice / military problem.
You know, I interviewed Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs last week, who said that cartels really should be treated as terrorists, almost like ISIS. Take a listen to what he said.
They are working as a terrorist organization to actually kill Americans. So the first step, Rita, in my opinion, is to declare them international terrorists and use all of the capacity that would allow us to do. And that would allow us to do things like attack their finances.
It's interesting because he's talking about funding as well as also military. Do you see this going on parallel paths? The other thing, too, is what Lindsey Graham was talking about would go after, quote, sort of conspirators, if you will. And you could say that China, by facilitating some of the, some of the ingredients for fentanyl that then goes to those labs and then comes across our borders and pours into America, killing so many American lives, that could mean going after China, too, Charles.
Yeah, it could. I mean, first, regarding the financing approach, you know, we've been going after the money of the cartels for a very long time under the criminal justice approach. And it's very hard to do because, of course, the cartels have a lot of their money off the books.
And guess what? A lot of the money's here in America, too, Charles. You know that. I mean, that's a tragedy, too.
That's exactly right. Exactly right, going north and back south. So you're exactly right. But as far as coming up with an effective strategy, Rita, we have to have an administration that's going to be honest about the entirety of the problem. And the Biden administration can't even wrap their hands around admitting that the border is not secure. So we should not be talking about fentanyl, for example, if the U.S. government's being honest about this, without mentioning China in the same breath. But yet somehow this administration is failing to do so. So if we're not going to recognize the extent of the problem and what the cause is for it, the administration's policies, then how is this administration going to put forth an effective strategy? And my answer to that question is they're not. You can designate these groups whatever you want. If you don't identify the problem correctly and admit you have one, you're not going to solve it.
Yeah, it's just like AA. You first have to say, listen, I am drinking, and then to fix it. But you're right, they're not acknowledging it. I want to ask you, too, Charles, because this was stunning, that came from the president of Mexico, President Obrador, basically pointed the finger at the United States. He said, here we don't produce fentanyl, we don't consume it. And then he said, why don't the United States take care of their problem of social decay? that's troubling. That's from the president on the other side. You talked about the lack of leadership on our side. That is a really dangerous combination.
You know, I've been writing about the relationship between Mexico and the United States for a very long time, directly related to the cartel problem. And this is what I call Mexico's "how dare you" strategy. We have seen this not under just this Mexican president, but the previous presidents as well. And that is, big bad United States, don't come in here and tell us how to handle our troubles when you're the one that's creating the big problem for us of causing the cartel's business by the demand side in the United States. We have a very, very tricky relationship with Mexico when it comes to solving this cartel problem. They are really, there's a baseline of cooperation, but I would not describe it as overly extensive. Let's remember, Customs and Border Protection do not have a mirror agency on the other side of that border in Mexico, for example. So I would say we're not in lockstep in how to solve this problem, which is why I think it's come to the time that the United States may have to act unilaterally against the cartels.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people seem to think right now, too, as well, Charles. Thank you very much for your perspective. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Charles. Good to see you.
You too, Rita.